Welcome to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with your host, Austin Davidson and John Keir, talking Steelers all the time. Now, here's Austin and John.
Hello, and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and joining me as always is my co-host, Austin Davidson.
Heyo.
It's Season 3, Episode 49. The Pittsburgh Steelers roll into Baltimore and pick up a 23-16 victory over the hated Ravens. Pittsburgh now at 5-2-1. The Ravens dropped to 4-5 in third place in the AFC North Division. The Steelers win win games in Baltimore in back-to-back seasons for the first time in the Ben Roethlisberger era, at least in games that Roethlisberger has started. You know, there were times it felt like the Steelers were really in control of this game, but at the end of the day, it came down to the last couple drives, as it always does. What were your quick thoughts and takeaways from this one?
Well, it was a great game all around, like this matchup typically is, but while it felt like the Steelers had control most of the game, it was really close at the end of the day. Then defense did really solid in this one, but I do think their performance was helped by Flacco not playing well at all. And then lastly, I don't think I have ever seen a drive quite like the one where Ben looked to be hurt bad. I went through so many emotions so quickly. What were your takeaways from this game?
Well, I guess my initial thoughts are just I was thinking about the Steelers' record at 5-2-1. And I know I mentioned it on the last podcast we did together, that this team was at 1-2-1, and they looked like they were dead, kind of like a lost cause after 4 games. There was more talk about the Steelers in position for a top 10 pick, and now here they are at first place in the division, having wins over all 3 division opponents. As of right now, the Ravens are like 2.5 games, or I think a game and a half. The tie always complicates things. The Ravens are in the Steelers' rearview mirror, and so are the Bengals, who are off this week. But the Steelers are in control of the division. They control their own destiny now, and despite the slow start, they look like a much better football team. That's why you can't judge or seal a team's fate in the first few games of the season, unless, of course, they lose their starting quarterback and whatnot. But the point I'm trying to get across is they looked terrible the first month of the season, but they came back and they've looked like a much more solid and complete team the last few weeks. A lot of it has had to do with the play of the offensive line, and my other takeaways included the fact that the offensive line just really put on a clinic for the fourth straight game. They've shown that they're once again a force to be reckoned with on the ground after not really doing a whole lot to help James Conner open up some ground or some holes on the ground in weeks 2 through 4. And then on the flip side, the defense wasn't great, but as we've seen the last few weeks, they do what they have to do to win ball games, and that's really important going forward. A relatively clean injury report coming out of today's game. Ben Roethlisberger injured his shoulder. Obviously, we were just talking about that, Austin. It looked really serious at the time, the way he kind of landed and how long it took him to sort of sit up. But my initial thoughts were it's either pretty bad or he just got the wind knocked out of him, because the way he landed, you can tell a lot of weight fell on that shoulder, but at the same time, you can also see that's a pretty big person falling on you. And I've fallen that way where I've had someone land on me like that, and when it gets the wind knocked out of you, it's like, wow, it seems really bad, but after like a couple minutes, you'll be okay. It was certainly a whirlwind.
Oh, yeah. It was totally scary for a good, 2 minutes, because he was on the ground for a long time. I think it was only 2 minutes, but it felt like it was 15. And it was like that scene in The Lion King where he's like, get up. And it was just really sad for a good 3 minutes. I was like, everything filled my head. I was like, oh, God, the season is over. Oh, geez, Josh Dobbs is coming in. Oh, no. It was just a bunch of that. But luckily, he only got the wind knocked out of him, and like John said, it is not a good feeling. It does take a long time to get up from, because you feel like you can't catch your breath at all. So we're just glad that he's not super seriously injured.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, when it happens, you feel like it's it feels like one of the worst things in the world. You feel like you're dying, but it's quite simple as just catching your breath, and it does take a few minutes, which luckily, it's almost like him sitting on the turf gave him the time he needed. How long it took him to get to the sideline. If he just managed to just get up and like sprint to the sideline, he'd have probably missed three or plays or more. So it actually worked out well for the Steelers. But then again, the way Josh Dobbs threw that first football, maybe he'd have had a fine few plays himself. But in any case, we'll get into that in a little bit. But as far as players we thought were going to be important and certain bold predictions, how did yours pan out?
Well, making my X Factor Vance McDonald was the complete wrong choice because I felt like he had his worst game of the season this one. Then on the other side, I made it Cameron Hayward, and he didn't light up the stat sheet. And I know I said I would give up on him for the season if he didn't get a sack here, but he caused a lot of pressure. So, I mean, it was an okay pick. Still, though, if I wanted to pick the biggest X Factor for this game, I should have went with Dupree or Hilton, who both went big in this game, in my opinion. As for my bold predictions, none of them were right. Hayward didn't have a sack, Vance didn't have a touchdown, and Boswell missed a PAT and only hit a super short field goal, so I was super off. How did your X Factors and bold predictions pan out?
Well, I'm going to admit to you, I don't remember what my bold predictions were, but I do know that I picked, actually, I don't remember my offensive X Factor, but I know it was someone on the offensive line. At first I had Villanueva, but I'm thinking now I might have changed it to David DeCastro.
David DeCastro is correct.
Okay. Well, I guess really you can go with any of the offensive linemen. I feel like Villanueva stood out in a more positive light just because of the fact that he was blocking Terrell Suggs most of the day. But really just the entire offensive line performed very well in this one. And then on defense, it was Sean Davis. He was a guy I was really watching today. He didn't really come up with any huge plays, but he's been far more noticeable lately for good reasons. He's been rock solid in the back. I think he's been adjusting much better to his role as a free safety. And he also had a pretty big play on the Ravens' final punt return late in the game. He actually chased down and crushed the Ravens' punt returner. That was a very nice play. I believe it was Chris Jones, I believe. It might have been Eric Weddle. I believe it was Jones. But in any case, he performed very well and he led the team in tackles. So I thought that was a pretty solid pick, kind of under the radar though. So let's get into the game. Pittsburgh controlling the ball on offense for most of the game. We've seen them do this a couple times this year, and in no game was it more impressive than this one against the Ravens defense, which I think is considered league-wide to be one of, if not the best defenses in the NFL. The Steelers didn't really gash them for a ton of big plays, but they just consistently moved the ball with the short passing game and the ground game. It was just kind of an all-out just attack, and it wasn't really the whole typical explosive Steelers offense we're used to, but it worked nonetheless. What about the offense was so successful, and how did the Steelers get it to go?
Well, I mean, it was really nice having a first quarter lead for like the first time all year. I believe it was the first time all year in this game, but starting with the quarterbacks, and yes, quarterbacks plural, I have to start with the play that made my entire day. With Ben on the ground for an extended period of time and a holding call on Big Al, Josh Dobbs has to enter the game on 2nd down and 20. I was thinking likely what everyone else was thinking. He's just going to hand the ball off at first because by the time Dobbs was in the huddle, Ben was already being talked about looking ready to go and having his helmet on the sideline. And for a split moment, it did look like that was what was going to happen. But it was an option play, and he decided to hold on to it, reel back, and fire for a 22-yard gain to Juju for the first down. It was such a simple play, but for all the flack I gave the Steelers for drafting him, for all the flack fans gave the Steelers for keeping him over the new Jaguars quarterback, Landry Jones, I was just happy to see on his first non-preseason throw, Dobbs do something great. I think I can easily say I was the most excited I've ever gotten over a non-touchdown throw in my life. Obviously, we will never know, but in my mind, Jones doesn't make that throw, and instead just let Connor handle it. But now that I got that proud dad-like moment out of the way, let's talk about how Ben performed. Like we expected, the broken finger on his non-throwing hand did not hinder him at all, and we even saw him stiff-arm with that hand on one of his runs. It was a really solid performance from him stat-wise. I mean, there were some questionable throws, like the one weird misfire he had where he let go of the ball when he didn't want to, but he didn't throw any interceptions and threw 2 touchdowns, so that's always good. I really liked how he spread the ball, though. It really affected Brown's numbers, but 7 different guys had over 2 catches, including 7 from Juju and Connor. Both those guys were really solid in this game. We saw Connor get his first receiving touchdown of his NFL career, and Juju, I felt like, was a difference maker. He had that long 22-yard gain from Dobbs, as I mentioned, but he also converted a 2nd down and 1 and got a long gain off of that, too. Then Brown didn't really do as much, but he nearly had the catch of the year for the NFL. It was just out of bounds, but it was OBJ-like. He obviously got the touchdown in this one, which was very nice as well. He kind of made a little bit of moves to get in there, and that's classic Brown. But really, he could have gotten 2 touchdowns. So Brown had beaten Weddle and the corner that was on him and was open in the back of the end zone on one of the plays, but Ben just couldn't find him. It would have been his 2nd touchdown, and he would have had it easily. But moving on to the other guys who caught balls, Switzer came up with a few clutch catches in this one, only dropping a screen that, in my opinion, was a really bad play call. Then, speaking of clutch catches, Jesse James came up huge with his long 51-yard catch, which wasn't the prettiest catch, but all that matters is that hashtag Jesse James caught it. And it set a record for his longest reception and was also the longest play the Ravens have given up all year. So shout out to him. Now let's talk about James Washington and Vance McDonald. James caught 2 of his 5 targets, with one of those targets being thrown too early and hit him low. So that one I don't really count against him, but I'm still looking for more from him. As it is shaping up, it's likely Justin Hunter. It's going to be Justin Hunter who will be active this next game, because they said they're going to keep switching them until they have a clear and defined wide receiver 3. And at this point, I'm just kind of hoping for Rodgers to get activated. Even though Rodgers didn't have that great of a year last year, I think I'd honestly just rather see what he can do at this point, see if maybe he can return to that first-year form we saw him. But now to get to Vance, he was having an okay day until the end of the half, where he dropped like 2 balls, and at first one got called for a fumble that was going to be a touchdown. Luckily, it wasn't even close. The rest were just doing really bad. I didn't think it was a fumble. He rolled over and then it fell out, but apparently the rest saw something different. Anyhow, he just was having a great day today altogether, and this was easily his worst game of the year thus far. But now let's move on and talk about the offensive line and the running backs. Baltimore only got 1 sack, and it was a sack that Ben Roethlisberger wanted to take because it ran off more clock. He also had plenty of time, and it wasn't really like a really good sack that a guy came flying in less than 2 seconds. It was just it was a covered sack more than anything. So shout out to the offensive line for another great performance. I mean, in this game, Ben was under a little more pressure than what we grew accustomed to the past 3 games. And there were a few holding penalties, but still a great performance from this unit altogether. You can't expect them to give up 0 sacks and 1 quarterback hit every game. They're still performing at a very high level. They continue to be great at run blocking, though, mostly in the first half, because it took a little bit of a dip in the second half. But Connor still ate today. He was very hungry. He averaged 4.5 yards a carry and went over 100 yards for the 4th straight game. He was huge for the Steelers win today. I really can't say enough good things about him. He just continues to impress. And I think by I believe it was the 10th play of offense, he had already had more yards in this game than he did against the Ravens the first time. The entire game obviously wasn't that hard to beat. He only had 19 yards on the ground. But he definitely improved. This is definitely a different team. And I felt good about his performance. But what did you feel about the Steelers' offense in this game? How do you think they did?
Well, I already touched on it before, but we're so used to the Steelers being a deep passing team, an aerial raid team, so a team that scores quickly on offense, one that can really strike from anywhere. The last few weeks, especially against the Bengals and here in this game, we've seen the Steelers put together an offense that's been about almost back to the Bill Cowher days, a ball control offense that eats up clock, and it gives their defense a chance to stay rested while they just wear down the opposing defense. it was honestly pretty impressive, especially against this unit. Despite putting up only 23 points, let's talk a little bit about the touchdown drives. 9 plays, 61 yards, 4 minutes, 12 plays, 75 yards, 15 plays, 75 yards. The offense found a way to get it done early on. It was honestly, early on, it was all about James Conner. And he had 42 yards on the first drive alone. The drive stalled, and there was a very odd sequence in which the Steelers ran a draw play on a 3rd and 10, and Austin and I were texting back and forth about this. Unless if you are definitely going for it on 4th down, or it's a situation where you're just trying to eat clock, there's no reason to run the ball on a 3rd and 10. I was confused, but it did look like the Steelers were going to go for it. And then Roethlisberger stepped back and punted it, which the Ravens have, we've all seen Roethlisberger do this before throughout his career. I think on the broadcast they said it was his 6th or 7th punt in the NFL. So once he started lining up back a little bit, Eric Weddle ran back and then fielded the punt and then, returned it back. I forget how many yards. I think it was something like 18, so it was a net of close to 10 yards. So it was kind of a waste of time. At least if you're going to punt, just have Jordan Berry do it, because that's been his specialties, is pinning teams deep, working with the coverage team. But, outside of that, I don't really have a ton of complaints for the offense. It wasn't pretty or perfect, but it got the job done. Conner was the driving force behind the offense in the first half, both through the air and on the ground. He had 98 total yards, and when it wasn't Conner, it was a steady dose of a bunch of different guys on short passes, whether it be Juju Smith-Schuster, Antonio Brown, Vance McDonald, Ryan Switzer, James Washington, and then even a little bit of Jesse James. It resulted in a 14-6 halftime lead, and the Steelers got the ball back to start the second half and put up a very impressive drive, probably their most impressive drive on the season. A 15-play beauty that took up nearly half of the third quarter, and this is where we saw the Steelers' offense at its best, and that in particular was on 3rd down. 3 of their 10 third down conversions on the day came on that drive alone, and 5 different guys touched the ball. It was a beauty if you're into time of possession, which I personally am. And then with the Steelers up by just 7, they got a chance to extend their lead thanks to, as Austin already mentioned, the throw Josh Dobbs made on the 2nd and 20 inside your own 5. I sent him a video just how big that play was. Josh Dobbs, mind you, he didn't have a perfectly sealed pocket. He was facing pressure in the end zone when he made that throw. And mind you, there were 2 Ravens defenders within, probably 5 yards of Juju Smith-Schuster when he got that ball to him. So it wasn't like he was just thrown to a wide open guy. It was a tightly threaded ball, and stepping up in the pocket, delivering that strike in the face of pressure in your own end zone was really that's a veteran type throw, and that's something that you really don't see from someone on their first NFL throw. And I thought that was very, very great to see from him, and obviously it was kind of like, wow. Nobody really saw that coming. And then 2 plays later, Roethlisberger found James for 51 yards, and he nearly dropped it, but he did hold on, and it set up a Chris Boswell field goal to make it a 10-point lead once again. And then really the final drive was just a microcosm of what the game was all about. Despite holding tough, the Ravens had no answers for the Steelers on 3rd down. They kept coming with this fire blitz, but the quick passes just popping them over the top with these slants kept the sticks moving. We saw it happen with Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, James Conner, and even once with Vance McDonald. The Ravens just had no answer for it, and the Steelers kept moving the ball, and when they weren't converting those short 3rd downs, they were burning the clock with James Conner just giving him the ball. The Ravens did eventually get the ball back with no timeouts in a little over a minute, but the defense just cleaned up the mess for the win. It wasn't pretty, but at the end of the day, that's how you're going to win in playoff football. The time of possession was just outrageous. The Steelers had the ball for 36 minutes, the Ravens just 31. And in the red zone, the Steelers were 3 of 4. That's a good day. And they would have had over 400 yards of offense had Roethlisberger not taken that sack, but as Austin already mentioned, that was an important sack to take. That was the right play for Roethlisberger to make there. And he actually took off 8.5, almost 9 seconds by just running around and extending the play before he finally ate the sack. So that was important. On the flip side, the Steelers gave up just 16 points to the Ravens after giving up 26 at home. But the big plays for Baltimore were still coming, but they weren't quite as devastating as they were in the earlier matchup. And on top of that, the Steelers' red zone defense really cashed in this week. What do you have to say about their performance?
Well, I felt pretty good about the defense today, but like I said, I felt like Flacco sucking made them look a little better than they actually played. I still think they had a good day regardless, and the main thing was that they were getting pressure like they should against an offensive line missing its 2 starting tackles, and also having a banged-up guard in Alex Lewis. Still, though, part of me wishes they got a sack or 2 more against the tackles, the backup ones, but I suppose the pressure that they were applying on what felt like every play makes up for it. Both sacks I felt like were huge, though. The first one came from Vince Williams and Bud Dupree, and they killed all of the Ravens' momentum that they had after they had scored, and then the Steelers' offense stalled. So it was great timing for the defense to step up and kill the Ravens' drive, because at that moment, the Ravens had all the momentum. But anyway, then the other one was big in ending the game, too. It forced Flacco out of the pocket, and then Hayward pushed Flacco back into it to really start putting the game away. Speaking of Hayward, I'm going to say it again. I know I said I would give up on him if he didn't have a sack in this one, or at least a few more stats, but his pressure was huge in this game. He did get a stupid penalty with illegal hands to the face that took away what would have been to its first sack of the game. But then again, the penalty should have been offset by a hold on the Ravens center, Skira. As a whole, though, the defensive line did not do very good against the run, I felt. I mean, the Ravens didn't really get to rush much, but still, I felt like even at the end of the day, the rushing stats don't look very good for the Ravens. I felt like Mike Hilton stopped the run like twice. He blew up into the backfield and helped. I feel like the defensive line wasn't the reason why the run ended with a bad stat line for the Ravens. But most of the Ravens just tried rushing with Lamar Jackson, and hey, being a fan of the team versus them, I'll take it, but it feels forced and gimmicky with everything they do with Lamar Jackson. Steelers didn't respect him as a passer, which was the right thing to do, and it led to Jackson rushing 5 times for 10 yards and 9 of them coming on one play. That is what happens when no team is scared of Lamar Jackson throwing, because he's just not a threat that way. His threat comes on the ground, and no one is respecting him, and that's why he only rushed 5 times for 10 yards. The Steelers know what Lamar Jackson is in there to do. The Steelers didn't respect him as a pass catcher either, and that could have bit them. Luckily, Joe Flacco bailed the defense out on the play prior to the Ravens' first field goal, because Jackson was wide open and could have had a touchdown had Flacco gotten to him on his reads. He also fumbled very early on, so Jackson, I mean. So I don't know altogether. I think that the Ravens are just looking for a reason to dignify trading out into the first round for this guy this past year. Again, they probably should have just waited for a quarterback until this upcoming draft, but I guess everything looks good in retrospect. I think the Steelers' biggest problem in this game was penalties, though, per usual. And it's not even the volume. This one, actually, the Steelers did not get as many penalties, but it was more of the yardage that came off of the few penalties they got. Let me start this off by saying that this is the second game this year that I felt like the refs were clearly giving calls in the other team's favor. The only other game I thought this was kind of funny enough was the first game against the Ravens. I felt like both games against the Ravens, the refs were completely going in the Ravens' favor for a lot of calls. But I still don't use that as an excuse. I feel like the Steelers should be able to outplay that anyway. So anyway, the 3 big ones were all pass interferences, one on Terrell Edmonds, one on Morgan Burnett, and one on Sensabaugh. Now, while the Morgan Burnett one moved the ball to the 1-yard line, I'm mostly actually going to ignore that one, because that was one of the calls that I didn't like by the refs. As literally the play prior, Edmonds had done almost the exact same thing, but wasn't called. So what I'm saying is that the penalty was ticky-tacky. It's not consistent. I don't know if the Edmonds one wasn't a pass interference the play prior, this one shouldn't have been either, in my mind. Anyhow, though, that pass interference by Sensabaugh I believe to have been the worst, because he was in good coverage on Michael Crabtree. He just didn't have confidence in himself, so he grabbed at Crabtree and held him back. I don't think Crabtree would have made that catch had Sensabaugh just left him alone. So that one kind of sucked. But Then for the Edmonds one, it was pretty close, but he got in the way of his arm, so I see why the refs called it. And it was one of those plays where Edmonds has to get his head around because he could have made that play if he sees the ball. Both him and Burnett actually struggled with that in this game. Burnett actually had a pretty bad game, too, if you ask me. Just neither of them were getting their head around when the ball was coming close. They were just kind of throwing their hands up while in the face of the defender. But as for the rest of the defensive backs, I was pretty happy. They were able to contain John Brown, limiting him to only 3 catches for 17 yards, and really only struggled a bit against Snead. And that actually took me back a bit because I wasn't very high on Snead coming in. Still, though, 7 catches for 58 yards isn't dominant or anything. I felt like really the only other problems I had with the defense was that they struggled to cover tight ends a tiny bit. And then also, I was a little disappointed they couldn't force a turnover and was kind of upset over the lack of hustle when Lamar Jackson fumbled. I do think Cameron Hayward should have gotten there. It looked like Hayward just kind of stood up and just didn't move. So I was a little upset about that, but really, overall, the defense had a solid day. They kept the Ravens to not many points, and overall did pretty solid. What do you have to say about the defense coming out of this game?
Well, similar to what we've seen the past few weeks, like I mentioned before, they've specialized in the bend but don't break style of defense. As I mentioned before, the offense really helped them by keeping the ball for most of the game. The Ravens had the ball for just 23 minutes. So the offense does get an assist here, but the defense stepped up in the red zone today when it counted the most. Early on, the Ravens had a lot of success running the ball. They finished with 61 rushing yards, but you couple them not running the ball a lot in this game with the fact that they got behind a little bit early and the fact that they just weren't that good at it later on in the game. I feel better about the Steelers' run defense now than I did during the game. Case in point, the Ravens finished with 61 rushing yards on the day. 30 of them came on the first 2 drives, which resulted in just 3 points. So I feel okay about that performance. The pass defense was also all right. The stat line doesn't look too bad. I felt like the pressure just wasn't consistent enough on Flacco, and he just missed on some plays with some poor throws or decisions. He missed a wide-open Lamar Jackson in the end zone and underthrew another open receiver in the end zone later in the game as well. But outside of the 1 touchdown, the Morgan Burnett pass interference that led to having the ball at the 1-yard line, the defense was huge. Mike Hilton had a huge tackle on Lamar Jackson on a 3rd and short inside the 10. He was great, by the way, and another pass breakup and several huge tackles like that one. Terrell Edmonds did have a penalty, but he also broke up a pass in the end zone, and the 2 sacks came at crucial moments. Austin, you probably alluded to this as well. I know that you alluded to this as well, but the Ravens wasted a lot of downs trying to use Lamar Jackson. All you have to do is look at his stats in this one. He was much more effective in the Week 4 win for the Ravens, and he had a good game, but in this game, he really just was a non-factor. He didn't get a whole lot accomplished, and as a matter of fact, the Ravens' drives seemed to be almost halted in some cases when they used him. I bet Joe Flacco's not too happy about that. But the big problem right now with this defense is big plays. Listen to this, Austin. I'm looking at the long reception for all the Ravens receivers. Hayden Hurst had a 21-yard catch. Chris Moore had a 30-yard catch. Mark Andrews had a 21-yard catch. Willie Snead had a 26-yard catch. You add on the 2 pass interference penalties that went for 20-plus yards. That's 6 explosive pass plays right there. So if you take away the 2 long pass interference plays, Joe Flacco finished with 209 passing yards. You take away those 4 20-plus yard passing plays, Joe Flacco is 19 of 33 for just 111 yards. What do you think about that? How crazy is that?
That's absolutely nuts, dude. That's so funny.
So the point I'm trying to get across is that the defense, yes, Joe Flacco missed some plays, but if the Steelers had battened down the hatches a little bit and not allowed some of those big pass plays, that would have been huge for the defense, and it really would have kept them from being in positions where they would have had to stand on their head in the red zone. I also noticed that blitzing wasn't very effective in this one. Like we saw with the Bengals a few weeks ago, it could simply be a matter of the fact that AFC North teams excluding the Browns because they have a horrible offensive line, are just used to these kinds of blitz packages. But the four-man pass rush stunts worked like a charm today, specifically on the Tuitt sack. But even though Cameron Hayward didn't do much on the stat sheet, I can tell you he was making an impact. He just didn't clean things up, which is weird because, as Austin and I discussed before, that's the problem Stephon Tuitt had last season. At the end of the day, I think the defense just got away with some lucky breaks, but they were also hurt by some too on a couple of those pass interference plays. They gave up 16 points and have averaged 18 points against the last 4 games. That's how you win football games without an elite unit like the Ravens. You bend but don't break, and that's what they've done. So, at the end of the day, I'm happy with it. A unit that we haven't really seen a complete game from yet is special teams. We saw some better play from them, but still some concerning trends.
Yeah, man, it's really rough out here, to be honest, for the special teams. It's just looking like Chris Boswell is damaged goods at this point. He just missed another PAT. I was hoping that he wouldn't miss another one for the rest of the year because it's, in terms of kickers, it's really not a big ask unless you're like a Chargers kicker because all those guys suck, or a Buccaneers kicker, so all those guys suck. But I don't think you could really dignify keeping Boswell after this year. It's getting to the point where he's one missed PAT away from 5 missed PATs on the year. That's a lot to be at the halfway point and already be at that point. It's really rough. Then we had a good string of games from Barry, and this game he didn't really have that a long punt or anything, and so he went back to being what we expect from Barry for the most part. And that's really it. The coverage team also gave up another big run. Ryan Switzer got a 31-yard kick return in this game, and then Chris Moore did the exact same thing for the Ravens, got a 31-yard kick return. So they basically equalized each other. So special teams play hasn't been great, especially with all the penalties, but they did lower the penalties in this game. I felt like there wasn't as many coming from this unit. Still, I believe the most heavily penalized special teams unit in the league by far. But, they're working on it. Progress. What do you have to say about special teams?
Nothing more than what you said, other than I just wish Jordan Berry had another chance to pin the Ravens deep instead of that Roethlisberger punt. What do you think about that whole sequence, by the way?
Hated it. I agree with you exactly what you said. I texted you as soon as it happened because I wanted to remember to talk about it, and I still forgot about it. And basically, if you wanted to go for it on 4th down, then I understand running the ball with James Conner there. I understand if that's what you're doing, but to run with James Conner and then look for what you want. Personally, what I thought happened is that they were looking for a certain package out of the Ravens that if they thought they had what they wanted, that Ben would have went for it there. But I think as soon as Ben saw that they weren't in a formation that they wanted, he went back for the pooch kick. I think it was like an option in that sense. But I still don't like it because I feel like on 3rd down and 10, especially with where they were on the field, they should have been playing aggressively and trying to throw it. But I guess that's just on me. I hate that play call still. I still think it was wrong. I think that, I don't know. I really just don't agree with how that went down. I hold very strongly that the Steelers should have just went for it on 4th down. Even if they didn't get it, I don't think I would have cared because I hated the pooch punt more.
Here's something we can probably agree on. The biggest play of the game was probably Josh Dobbs' 22-yard pass to Juju Smith-Schuster, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that's the stronger than field play of the game easily. I think that I have never been so hyped in my life for something like that.
And we've already gone over the play quite extensively, honestly, but it needs to be said again that it was just a veteran-type play by a second-year player, and it was a big-time throw. Really kind of felt like it turned the tide of the game, too, so that was huge. The Stronger Than Steel Big Stop of the Week award is going to Stephon Tuitt for the second time in 3 weeks. His sack of Joe Flacco on the game's final drive all but sealed the victory. I'll give an assist to Cam Hayward for forcing pressure as well in this play, but with the Ravens out of timeouts and under a minute and a half to go, Tuitt picks up the sack. It burns a ton of time, and that's basically it from that point on. I believe the Ravens had one or two plays after that. They didn't have timeouts, so they were kind of like running all the way back to the line to try to get something off. Oh yeah, that was the weird offsides and false start. And then they had a quick 6-yard pass, and then it was the end of the game. So there were 44 seconds left when that play started, and then Tuitt sacked Flacco at 37 seconds. They didn't get the next play off till 14 seconds. So that was a huge sack right there, all but sealed the game. So Stephon Tuitt, for the second week in the past 3 games, earns the Big Stop of the Week award. So who is the stronger than steel player of the week?
For the second straight week, it's James Conner. It really wasn't even close this week. He just did so much, getting 107 yards on the ground and then 56 yards and a touchdown in the air. So Conner wins it for the second straight week.
All right, time for the results of our grades. With the quarterbacks, the first time we get to grade 2 different quarterbacks, I went with the cumulative grade of a B+. I thought Ben Roethlisberger was solid but not great. He had a few passes that were nearly intercepted, and he was kind of indecisive early on, but he made the big throws when they counted, and he had some nice veteran plays, including taking a smart sack at the end of the game. And then we already talked about Josh Dobbs and his fantastic throw, so I felt like a B+ was appropriate. Tip your cap to those guys.
Yeah, I went back and forth between an A- and a B+, but I felt like at the end of the day, Ben was just good and not great. So I'm going to go with an A+, despite Dobbs having that great 22-yard pass. I agree with you, B+.
All right. Running backs. I'm also going to go with the B+ here. Get used to that grade. I had a lot of it today. James Conner was fantastic early on, but he wasn't as impactful later on. The Ravens clearly sold out to stop him. He only picked up 31 yards in the second half. Jalen Samuels had a snap, and we didn't see any Roosevelt Nix, which is a good thing in this game, because if you try to load up and out-physical the Ravens with 2 tight ends, as the Steelers tried early on in the Ravens game in Week 4, it didn't work, so the Steelers just completely abandoned it. This was the way to get at the Ravens' defense in the ground game, and it worked for the most part. So B+ is what I ended up with.
Yeah, Conner did really good in the first half, but wasn't that big in the second, I felt like. I will say, though, Samuels looks to be improving as a pass blocker, as I saw him used this way at least once in this game. I felt like I couldn't remember the second one. I feel like it was more than once where he actually got a guy and blocked him good. But I'm going to give him a B+ for this so far. And I agree with you. With Rosie Nix, I think the Steelers really prepared tape-wise, because they realized what the Ravens' weakness was, and it's more of that dink and dunk and speed. The Ravens' defense isn't good against speed, and while the Steelers don't have a speedy guy, they saw what Christian McCaffrey and Cam Newton did last week, and they kind of used that same sort of game plan. So I agree with that. Rosie Nix not being used was actually okay in this game. But I agree with the B+. What did you give the wide receivers?
I'm also going with the B+ here. Not really any big plays from this unit, but 4 different guys contributed, and they all had important plays. I feel like if Ben Roethlisberger was a little more on target and decisive, they would have had bigger days. I dropped the grade from an A- because of Juju's huge drop in the middle of the field. I felt like that really helped keep the Ravens in the game for longer than they should have been in it. But not a bad day, so a B+ was appropriate.
For me, I gave them a B. I was left mostly unimpressed by these guys, if I'm being honest with you. Juju had 2 big ones, and then maybe had a nice touchdown, but the yardage wasn't even there, so I wasn't a big fan of them. But moving on to tight ends, what did you give them?
Went with the B. Vance McDonald had a quiet day for the first time since Week 2. He had a season low in yards, but he wasn't bad. And Jesse James had one of the biggest plays of the game, the longest play against the Ravens all season, a 51-yard catch and run. So B is the grade I went with. What about you?
I'm going to agree with you with the B. James' catch was huge, but Vance didn't have a good day, in my opinion. And also, James' catch could have been a touchdown had he not bobbled it, I believe. So I'm going to go with the B. Next up is the offensive line. What did you give them?
Offensive line was fantastic. They were dominant early on, and they protected Roethlisberger well all game long. Only struggles occurred late in the game when, as I said before, the Ravens sold out to stop the run. So this is a much different unit than we saw in Week 4. So A is certainly a good grade.
I I agree with you. Don't really have much complaints other than the penalties, so I'm going to give them an A like you did. Next up is defensive line. What did you give them?
B+. I want to see a little more consistency from this unit. I've been saying that all year, but they were rock solid. Javon Hargrave had a couple tackles. On the outside, Hayward and Tuitt were forcing pressure, and they both had 2 quarterback hits. Tuitt's sack we already went over was huge. They got the job done, plain and simple.
Yeah, I give them a B+ as well. I wanted to give them an A- and likely would have had Stephon Tuitt's first sack in the game counted, but I felt like they did solid in the pressure department. I just want more from their run defense, though, and I just felt like they weren't as good in that department. So B+. Moving on to linebackers, what do you give them?
Just confirming that I had a B+ for the defensive line. I'm going with a B for the linebackers. I wasn't really sure where to go with this unit. Even though TJ Watt led the unit in tackles, it felt like he wasn't there at times. And then John Bostic had a few nice plays. Vince Williams picked up a half sack. Bud Dupree felt like the most impactful guy, but only had 1 tackle. It was very bizarre, but they played well when they needed to again. But, they didn't have rounded games, so I feel like a B is better. A B is kind of shooting the gap there, so I'm going with a B.
I'm going to go with a B+ for them. Bud Dupree played great today, in my opinion. Even with that only 1 tackle, I just felt like he was causing pressure like a madman. Him and Vince split a sack, so I'm crediting that to him as well. Well, both the linebackers. I do wish Watt forced a little more pressure, though. I felt like you said, Watt wasn't really there, even though he had 5 tackles. But B+ for me for the linebackers. Moving on to defensive backs, what do you give them?
A-. They were just solid in this one, and I know there were penalties on Sensabaugh, Edmonds, and Burnett, but I think that most of them were outdoing themselves in this one. Mike Hilton continued to make plays, and Sean Davis was solid as well, so I was very impressed. A-.
I'm going with a B+. Mike Hilton and Joe Hayden played great, but those penalties gave the Ravens half their offense, and Burnett was just bad today, so I'm going to give them a B+. Specialists are next. What do you give them?
C+. There aren't any egregious errors this week, but, even with that and the fact that there weren't many penalties, Chris Boswell missed another PAT, and I read somewhere that all of his PATs are ones that he pushed. Did you see that?
Pushed, what do you mean pushed?
Pushed it to wide right. Pushed it wide right.
Oh, yeah, every single one has gone to the right, yeah.
That's bizarre, man. Oof. But in any case, Jordan Berry had only 1 solid punt on the day, so you can see better from this unit. So C+ because they haven't reached their potential yet.
I'm going to go with a B-. Switzer had a nice return, and then Moore had a nice return to equalize it out. Switzer was making smart decisions in this game, though, I felt, but Berry wasn't very good, and Boswell missed the PAT, which really stings, so I'm going to go with a B-. Maybe a little bit nice to them, because they really didn't do anything that great, but I'm going to stick with the B-. Last up, let's go with coaching. What did you give the coaching in this game?
A-. The Steelers played a technically sound game for the majority of the game. The Ravens were desperate for a win, and the Steelers went in there, out-schemed them, and outplayed them. It really felt like there weren't that many penalties either. Besides that strange sequence on the first drive for the offense, I was happy with the way the game went, too. Very impressed with the coaching staff in this one. Complete role reversal from what we saw in Week 4, so A- for the coachings.
I'm going to agree with you with the A-. The penalties definitely went down in this one, which is good, but something that really stuck with me is that play calling on the Steelers' first drive where they decided to run on 3rd and 10 and then pooch kick it. It was absolutely stupid in my mind. I know we went over it, but it really knocked them down for me, so I'm going to give them an A-.
Winners and losers. Who stuck out, Austin?
For me, my winners were Matt Filer and Bud Dupree. Filer in 2 starts against 2 solid defenses has been great. I mean, he technically gave up the 1 sack in this game, but Ben had so much time, and it was a sack taken purposely because there was no one open. It wasn't going to stop the clock with an incompletion, but Matt Filer was definitely still a winner in my book for the 2nd straight week. And then number 2 is Bud Dupree. Out of all the guys in this game, I felt like he caused the most pressure, which is very interesting to me. I have to wait and see for some official metrics on who was causing the most pressure for the Steelers defense. I honestly think that Dupree is either first or second. I would be surprised if he wasn't, because he felt like he was there almost every other play. But regardless, who are your winners?
My winners were Alejandro Villanueva and Sean Davis. Villanueva was great today. He stoned Terrell Suggs all game long and was physical in the ground game. I said before that I thought Villanueva's Pro Bowl season last year was undeserved based on his performance, but I don't feel that way this year. I think he's playing like a top 10 tackle, and I think that he is worthy of a Pro Bowl nod this year. Sean Davis was my X factor on defense this week, and although he didn't make any splash plays, he led the team in tackles, and he was noticeably decisive and physical, and he had a nice special teams tackle too. I feel like he's really adjusted well the last few weeks. My losers were Antonio Brown and Morgan Burnett. Now, the Antonio Brown, before you get mad, let me explain a bit. He should have had a much bigger day, but I feel like Ben Roethlisberger missed some passes Brown's way. He missed a touchdown pass in his direction too. If he was a little more precise, I think Brown could have had another touchdown, as I just mentioned, and well over 100 yards if he had the chance to get some of those catch and runs. But a little off target, but then again, it wasn't the end of the world either. And Morgan Burnett, I felt like he was all right last week, and he wasn't terrible in this game, but his negative plays really hurt the team. A pass interference penalty and a long completion, like I said, I don't think he was awful, but you'd rather have a quiet day where you don't see much from him like we saw 2 weeks ago, as opposed to having 2 negative plays like we saw this week. Who were your losers?
My losers were James Washington and TJ Watt. This was Washington's game to step up and prove why he should be active every game instead of Hunter, and he did not pull ahead in the wide receiver 3 race. In fact, probably Rodgers is just getting closer to winning that race at this point. Like I said, they might start thinking about activating him soon with how wide receiver 3 has been working out. But then for TJ Watt, he had the 5 tackles. I really don't feel like he was getting the pressure he should have in this one. I just want to see more consistency out of TJ Watt. That's been the thing with Watt this year. It's been, can he consistently put up pressure and get these sacks and not just have like huge performances and disappear? And I mean, in this one, I wouldn't say he disappeared. It's just not exactly what I wanted out of him.
All right. Any final thoughts on this game before we move on?
I do not. Do you?
I'm trying to check the stats here, but I think this is the second time in this game, in this rivalry's history, that neither team has turned the football over. I'm looking back. The first time I ever seem to remember that happening was the opening matchup between these teams in 2013. The Steelers improved to 2-4 by beating the Ravens 19-16 at home. The Ravens fell to 3-4. I think that was the first game between the two teams where there wasn't a turnover. This could be the second. There were no turnovers in this game. One fumble by Lamar Jackson or I forget the running back who he handed the ball to on a read option there, but the Ravens recovered, and that was the end of that. So just an interesting note there. Quick NFL note, Broncos center Matt Paradis broke his fibula, and his season is over. The Broncos losing a tough game. We'll get to that first. But first, let's talk about the greatest quarterback of all time in Nick Mullins. 3 touchdowns and over 260 yards against the Raiders in a thrashing of the Oakland Raiders by the 49ers on Thursday Night Football. Everyone saw this coming, I'm sure.
I mean, I did. I knew it. I knew Nick Mullins was the greatest of all time. I saw it from the get-go, and that is why I picked the 49ers to cover.
And Nick Mullins, mind you, was verified on Twitter in the middle of the game. The Niners going with him most likely next week, as C.J. Beathard will take a back seat. All of a sudden, the Niners look like they have 3 quarterbacks that can play in this league. Kind of a good problem to have.
Yeah, hopefully in this offseason they could maybe deal one for a pick of some sort, keep one as a backup. Hopefully they can make something work out.
It's certainly a very interesting situation right now. Getting into the games at 1 o'clock today, the Bills just have maybe one of the more anemic offenses in league history. Nathan Peterman, even when he's not making bad throws, he's still getting pick sixes, and the Bears just had their way with the Bills all day long. That was an ugly game. Ugly game.
What did it finish, like 46-9, something like that? It was really gross. Like, we were obviously busy watching the Steelers game when this was on, but like, I just remember looking and it just kept getting worse and worse. Like, there's a fumble return touchdown, there's a pick six. I was like, oh, geez, this is the Bills. This is on brand for the Bills.
41-9 was the final. Another rough one for the Bills. In Cleveland, the Browns held tough with the Chiefs for a little while, but the Chiefs pulled away 37-21. Baker Mayfield got hurt but did return. The Browns put up a surprisingly good fight without Hugh Jackson and Todd Haley. I was kind of surprised about that.
Yeah, it wasn't like they didn't get stomped. I talked about how I thought that the spread wasn't big enough, and I would have picked that at 10, and I almost ate my words because the Browns actually had it pretty close at one point.
A relatively quiet game in Miami this week. Sam Darnold overpowered by Brock Osweiler. Not really overpowered, but I guess at least the Dolphins' defense overpowered the rookie. Just not a lot of weapons for the Jets right now. They got steamrolled on the road. Only 13-6, but they never had a chance.
Oh, yeah. Kiko Alonso has been quietly really good for the Dolphins this year, by the way. He had a pick in this game, and Miami just wins just because the Jets aren't very good right now. I feel like both teams aren't that good, but just the Jets are just really bad.
All right. The Atlanta Falcons go into Washington and come away with a convincing win. Julio Jones finally catches a touchdown pass for the Falcons. They win handily 38-14. I was very close to picking the Redskins on this one. I'm going to thump my chest a little bit here because I did see this coming. Not this big of a blowout, but I did see the Falcons winning this one. At the end of the day, Austin, the Redskins are in the NFC East, and the NFC East is just a crapshoot.
So is that your reason for picking them? Because when I did the podcast, I literally saw that and I was like, I have no idea what made him pick the Falcons. I want to know why. And I literally said, I don't know if you're listening, I was like, this game is going to come back to bite me because I questioned his pick. And it literally did that. What were your thoughts on picking the Falcons? I genuinely want to know going in.
I don't know. See, the Redskins started the year winning one and losing one, and winning one and losing one, and they had a couple victories in a row, but I don't know. Everyone seemed to be buying high on the Redskins. Like, I listened to Pro Football Talk, and Mike Florio had been picking against them most of the year, and he was finally like, I'm done picking them, or picking against them. I'm going to pick them this time. And I was just like, the Falcons have won a couple in a row. They've still got that really good offense. It'll be tough, but I just felt like they were going to have enough to pull out the win. I didn't think they were going to win in a blowout by any means, but I felt good about them.
Very interesting. I was so low on the Falcons because of who they beat up on. Like, they barely got past the Giants. And I know it's different. You can't just, move one game to the other. But the Redskins, ran all over the Giants and just beat them up the last week. I was just so confused when the Falcons just smacked the Redskins down as hard as they could.
All right. Next game is the Buccaneers and Panthers. Not enough Fitzmagic right now as the Panthers pull away with a 42-28 victory. We'll be seeing the Panthers on Thursday, but for the time being, they come away with a relatively close win. They were up big, but then Fitzpatrick brought them back, but then the Panthers reestablished the lead. Did you get a chance to watch that game at all?
No, not really. I only got to see Curtis Samuel's 33-yard touchdown run on the, trickery, the reversals. But other than that, I didn't really get to see it. I watched the score a little bit as it changed. I thought I believe the Panthers were up by 21 at one point, and then just absolutely blew it. And then I remember thinking, yeah, that's Fitzmagic. Not the only game that a team blew 21 points and still won today.
Texans and Broncos in a coin flip game. The Texans win on the road. Brandon McManus misses a field goal as time expires. Demaryius Thomas had a quick impact, but then was pretty quiet the rest of the day.
I was unfortunately at work, so I didn't get to watch this one. All I know is they lost like their only good offensive lineman that they had. So rest in peace to Matt Paradis, and rest in peace to Vance Joseph. He is likely getting fired very soon. I don't know if he's going to make it to the end of the season.
LA Chargers pull out the win in Seattle. I'm going to be honest with you, Austin. I thought the Seahawks were better than you have thought, as I think we've already talked about. I also didn't think that highly of the Chargers. I went back and I looked at their schedule. This is the first quality win I think they've had all year. Their wins going back before this game, they had beaten the Bills by 11. They had beaten the Niners by 2 points with C.J. Beathard. They beat the Raiders by 16 at home. They beat up on the Browns when the Browns were in free-falling mode, and they beat the Titans on the road, who I think very, very little of. And I thought they were a good team, but I thought that the Seahawks probably had a good chance to win. But the Chargers go in on the road after the bye week and have a very impressive win. I did not see that coming.
It probably helped that Chris Carson got hurt pretty early on. He got 40 yards and then got injured, and then also Melvin Gordon's been a beast. So I did think that the Chargers were the better team, and it was mostly because of their only losses were to the Rams and the Chiefs. I mean, yeah, those are two great teams right now. The Rams just suffered their first loss, and the Chiefs are still probably the favorite to win the AFC, even with the Patriots having beaten them 2 weeks ago. But still, though, that's what weighed down more than me. I know the Chargers beat up on those bad teams, and then also because I don't dislike the Seahawks and I always pick against them, so I picked the Chargers to win, and I felt like that was what was going to happen.
Rams at Saints, you just alluded to it. The Saints come out victorious, 45-35 over the Rams. The Saints led big at halftime. The Rams got 21 unanswered. Then the Saints came back and won the game. A lot of people thinking this could be an NFC Championship preview. Everyone seems to think that the winner automatically is the shoo-in for the number 1 seed. I don't see it that way. I figured the Rams have the hardest game left on their schedule. They play the Chiefs in a couple weeks, but the Saints have the tougher schedule throughout. I mean, they play the Panthers twice. That's Cam Newton 2 times. Those games are always a crapshoot. You've got Matt Ryan one more time. That took you to overtime. You've got the Steelers in Week 16. The Saints by no means have home field advantage locked down. I still think the Rams get this one, but for the time being, the Saints are the best team in the league.
This game wasn't as good as I hoped it would be. I just want to say that. I wanted more defense to be played. There were 0 sacks in this game, and I don't know whether to attribute that to 2 good offensive lines or just because the defenses were that bad, but like, I think that the rest of everyone else probably enjoyed this game. I wanted more defense, though. I thought that part of me knew it was going to be a shootout. Other half of me wanted it to be a little bit not. I wanted it to be a little bit lower scoring. And also the Saints really tried blowing this game. 21-point lead just immediately dissipated like halfway through the third quarter. It was just I thought they were going to fall apart and lose. I thought it was like scripting up for that to happen, but they still pulled it through.
Sunday Night Football having just concluded a few minutes ago. The Patriots win 31-17 over the Packers. I didn't get a chance to see any of it, as I'm sure you didn't either, but it sounds like just the Patriots were a better team, plain and simple, as we already know the Packers aren't very good.
Everything went in. I actually did get to watch, and I will say right now, everything went in the Patriots' favor. First of all, towards the end of the game, Aaron Jones fumbled, which that I have no problem with. Aaron Jones, that's on the Packers. That's nothing to do with them. But then on the next ensuing drive, the defense held the Patriots, and I believe it was the tight end on the punt ran into their kicker, into their punter, I mean, and he didn't hit his plant leg, and he hit him with his back. He tried turning, so what should have been a 5-yard penalty, and it was I should clarify that it was 4th and 21 at this point. So what should have been a 5-yard penalty, and now 4th and 16, and that wouldn't have been in field goal range, the refs called it wrong. They called it like he hit the plant leg, and it was 15 yards and automatic first down. And at this time, the Patriots, I believe it was 17-17 at this time. So it really screwed over the Packers. And then the other thing that screwed over the Packers, injuries. They obviously traded Clinton-Dix in this past trade deadline, but dude, like, every one of their players got hurt. Blake Martinez, their standout linebacker, got hurt. Their defensive back that was playing, his name is skipping my mind. Whitehead. Whitehead got ejected for throwing a punch. That was the guy that was stepping up. I didn't even know his name until he got ejected. Then they lost Bryce Butler to an injury. Like, everything went in the Packers, in the Patriots' favor. I think that the Packers should have won this game. I highly think that the biggest difference maker was the refs calling a 15-yard penalty that screwed over the Packers. It was the wrong call. So it's going to be fun to see what happens tomorrow, because it always seems like this happens to the Patriots. They just get that really nice call that changes the momentum for them. So I just wanted to go on a rant about that for a little bit.
All righty. And then Monday night still to come, Titans at Cowboys. Cowboys are getting 5.5 at home. Would you like to make any changes to your picks?
No, I'm going to keep the Titans there. I still think that both teams are bad. I don't like that the Dallas is being favored by so much.
I don't like either team, but I think very, very little of the Titans right now, so I'll take the Cowboys to cover still. That'll wrap things up for today's edition of the Stronger Than Steel podcast. We'll be back shortly to do a preview episode of the Thursday night game against the Panthers. As always, thank you for listening to the Stronger Than Steel podcast with Austin and John. Have a great night.
Have a good night.
You have been listening to Stronger Than Steel podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget to check out our website listed in the description below.